My stepdad ordered me off his property at a barbecue because I challenged his politics. My house. Can you believe someone would look you dead in the eye, call your home their property, and then demand you leave it? My stepdad did exactly that. He laughed when I pointed out the house was legally mine, daring me to do anything about it. What he didn't expect was a 30-day eviction notice, served right alongside his apple pie. Slight pause, tone shifts to slightly more conversational but still intense. Okay, so I know that sounds wild, but trust me, this story needs some serious context. My name's Jason, I'm 32, and this whole mess revolves around my stepdad, Doug, who's 58. For 15 years, he was this constant, grating presence in our lives, a man who, until recently, had completely overstayed his welcome in the most audacious way possible. It all started when I was 17. My dad, a quiet, incredibly sharp man who'd spent 25 years as a senior accountant, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. He wasn't flashy, didn't chase after designer labels or expensive cars, but he was brilliant with money. Absolutely brilliant. The kind of guy who maxed out his retirement, invested smart, and had our family home paid off by the time he was 45. When he died, everything went to my mom and me. The house, life insurance, investments, a legacy built on a lifetime of quiet dedication. My mom was shattered. They'd been married since college, and at 42, she was suddenly alone with a teenage son and no idea how to handle the finances. My dad had always taken care of everything. And that's when Doug swooped in. 8 months after the funeral, he met my mom at a grief support group. Now, grief support isn't bad, obviously, but Doug had been there for his second wife, who'd passed away 3 years earlier. 3 years. The guy was still attending meetings long after anyone else would have moved on. In hindsight, it's chillingly clear he was trolling for vulnerable widows. Doug was the complete opposite of my dad. Where my dad was quiet, Doug was loud. Where my dad was practical, Doug was flashy. Where my dad was thoughtful, Doug was endlessly opinionated. He drove this ridiculously lifted truck he couldn't afford, wore clothes with huge logos, and had an answer for everything. Politics, sports, how you should live your life. Doug was the self-proclaimed expert on it all. He never met a topic he didn't think he owned. My mom, still raw with grief and desperately lonely, fell for his confident act. Within 6 months, they were engaged. A year later, they were married. I was 18, about to start college, so I thought, whatever. She's an adult. Her life, her choices. I didn't like Doug, but at least I wouldn't have to live with him full-time anymore. Pause, a hint of dark humor. Here's where things get really interesting from a legal perspective. My dad, bless his foresight, had set up the house in a very specific way before he died. It was held in a trust, with me as the primary beneficiary. My mom had lifetime residency rights, meaning she could live there as long as she wanted, but she couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or transfer ownership without my consent.
Why?
My dad worried. He never said it out loud, but I found a letter in his files that explained everything. He'd seen too many widows lose everything to new husbands who turned out to be financial parasites. My dad was smarter than any of us knew at the time. A genius, really. So, when Mom married Doug, she moved him into a house that wasn't truly hers to give. She had the right to live there, and she could invite guests. But Doug? He had zero legal claim to that property.
None.
The deed was in my name, through the trust. The property taxes came to me. Homeowner's insurance was in my name. Did I mention any of this to Doug?
Nope.
Did Mom? Apparently not. She probably didn't fully grasp the legal arrangement herself, and I certainly wasn't going to explain it to a guy I already didn't trust. So Doug moved in, immediately started calling it his house, and nobody ever corrected him. For years, it was fine. Mostly. I finished college, got my civil engineering degree, landed a good job, and moved across town. I only visited for holidays and occasional family dinners. Doug and I maintained a tense, but ultimately civil, relationship. He'd make endless comments about my career, my dating life, my choices, whatever he felt like criticizing that day. I'd just smile, nod, and leave as fast as politely possible. My mom seemed happy enough, so I just kept my mouth shut. But let me tell you what living with Doug was really like for my mom. The man had rules for everything. The thermostat had to be exactly 68 degrees year-round because that was optimal for human productivity. Never mind that my mom was always cold and wore sweaters indoors in summer. The TV was always tuned to his channels. If mom wanted to watch something else, she had to wait until he was out or asleep. Dinner had to be at 6:30 p.m. Not 6:25, not 6:35. Exactly 6:30. Doug believed in discipline and routine, you see. He controlled the grocery shopping, the household budget, the social calendar. My mom had to ask permission to invite her own friends over to a house she legally had the right to live in. And if Doug didn't like them, he'd make the visits so unbearable they wouldn't come back. Over the years, mom's social circle shrank to almost nothing. I watched it happen, slowly, tragically, but felt utterly powerless. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd defend him or change the subject. She'd spent 23 years with my dad, a true partnership of equals, and now she was walking on eggshells, living like a guest in her own home. Sigh. A moment of deep frustration. The financial stuff absolutely burned me, too. Doug had a pension, Social Security, some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to contribute.
Did he?
Of course not. His money was his. House expenses were covered by the property situation, whatever that vague nonsense meant. My mom's modest income from part-time work went almost entirely to groceries and household supplies, while Doug's pension funded his hobbies, his truck payments, his golf outings. I did the math once. Over 14 years, Doug had essentially received free housing worth over $200,000 in equivalent rent, not including utilities, property taxes, insurance, or maintenance, all of which came from the trust my father had set up and funded. Doug was essentially living off my dead father's generosity, all while acting like he was the big provider. It made my blood boil. Then Doug retired 3 years ago, and everything got exponentially worse. With nothing to do all day, he became utterly insufferable. He'd watch cable news 12 hours a day, joined all these online concerned citizens groups, and developed increasingly extreme opinions about absolutely everything. Politics, social issues, economics, you name it. He became one of those guys who could turn any conversation into a rant about whatever was making him angry that day. Family dinners became minefields. I learned to never mention current events, never discuss anything political, never express any opinion that might contradict his echo chamber. Even neutral topics could spiral. I once mentioned I was excited about a new high-speed rail project my firm might be involved with, and Doug spent 45 minutes explaining why public transportation was some kind of communist plot. I just wanted to talk about engineering. The man made everything exhausting. My mom started looking tired. Really tired. She'd try to change subjects, smooth over arguments, desperately keep the peace. I noticed she'd stopped expressing her own opinions completely. She just nodded along with whatever Doug said, then gave me these apologetic looks when he wasn't watching. I asked her once if she was okay, truly okay. She just said Doug was passionate and she'd learned to let things go. That broke my heart a little. But what could I do? She was an adult, making her own choices. Or so I thought. Building tension. Then came the barbecue. 4th of July weekend. My mom had organized a family reunion barbecue, extended family, neighbors, some of her book club friends, maybe 30 people total. All gathered in the backyard of my house. Doug was in his element. He'd set himself up at the grill like he was commanding a military operation, loudly announcing his opinions on the proper way to cook meat, dismissing everyone else's input. He was 3 sodas deep and feeling chatty, which, let me tell you, was never a good combination. I was sitting with my cousin Brian and his wife, trying to have a normal conversation about Brian's new job. Doug wandered over, spatula in hand, and just inserted himself. "You know what the problem is with this country?" he announced, as if anyone had asked. We all exchanged those resigned looks, the ones families share when they know exactly what's coming. Doug launched into a tirade. The specific politics don't really matter, honestly. What mattered was that he was loudly expressing some pretty extreme views in front of 30 guests, many of whom clearly disagreed, judging by their uncomfortable expressions. I watched my aunt visibly shift in her lawn chair. Brian's wife suddenly became very interested in her potato salad. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down, who'd known my father for 20 years, was staring at the ground like she wished it would swallow her whole. Doug didn't notice any of this. He never did. The man had the self-awareness of a brick wall. I tried to stay quiet. I really did. But then he said something that was just factually, undeniably wrong. Not a matter of opinion, but an actual misstatement of basic facts about how government programs work. As a civil engineer who works on infrastructure projects, I actually know quite a bit about how government funding and oversight functions. So, politely, I corrected him. Actually, Doug, that's not quite how it works. The funding mechanism is structured differently. I can explain if you're interested. I said it calmly, respectfully, genuinely just trying to correct a factual error he was broadcasting to everyone. Doug's face went scarlet. He doesn't like being corrected. Never has. Oh, here we go, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The college boy thinks he knows more than everyone else. Typical. I'm not saying I know more. I responded, my voice still level, though my patience was wearing thin. I'm just saying that the specific thing you described isn't how the process actually works. I deal with this stuff professionally. You deal with building bridges. You don't know anything about the real issues. Infrastructure funding is literally my job, Doug. He puffed up like a territorial bird. Some guests were openly watching now, others pretending not to. You know what your problem is? Doug said, pointing his spatula at me. You think because you went to college and got some fancy degree that you're better than hardworking Americans who actually built this country. I sighed, exasperated. I never said anything like that. I'm just telling you that what you said about the funding structure was incorrect. No, you're disrespecting me in my own home in front of everyone. Dramatic pause, building to the core conflict, and there it was. The phrase. The one that started everything. Your home. I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. That's right. My home, my backyard, my rules. And my rule is that nobody disrespects me at my own barbecue, so if you can't show some respect, you can get off my property. I just stared at him. My mom had appeared at the edge of the patio, looking absolutely panicked. Brian and his wife were frozen. A few neighbors had stopped pretending not to listen. Doug, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Just to be clear, you're telling me to leave your property because I corrected a factual error? I'm telling you to leave because you don't know your place. This is my house. I'm the man of this family, and I won't be contradicted by some know-it-all kid. I was 32 years old. The kid comment just grated. Mom rushed over, desperately. Doug, honey, let's just calm down and enjoy the party. No, Linda, he snapped. I'm tired of tiptoeing around his feelings. He thinks he can come into my house and tell me I'm wrong. Not happening. Not anymore. A slow, deliberate tone, as if recalling a pivotal moment. Doug, I said, slowly, deliberately. Whose name do you think is on the deed to this house? He actually laughed. Right in my face. What? Mine and Linda's, obviously. We've lived here for 14 years. Have you ever actually seen the deed? I pressed. He sputtered. I don't need to see some piece of paper. I live here. I've lived here for over a decade. This is my home. Actually, I cut him off. The property is held in a trust established by my father. The deed is in my name. Has been since Dad died. You don't own this house, Doug. You don't even rent it. You live here because I allow it. Rent-free, I might add. You haven't contributed a single dollar toward the mortgage, the property taxes, or the homeowner's insurance because there is no mortgage. And I pay the taxes and insurance. Doug's face cycled through every shade of red, then pale, then back to an angry crimson. That's ridiculous. Linda, tell him that's ridiculous. My mom looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Doug, she said, her voice small, he's right. The house was in David's trust. It passed to Jason when David died. I have the right to live here, but I don't own it. You never told me that, he roared. I didn't think it mattered. We live here. We take care of it. I didn't think. You didn't think. Doug's voice was rising, hysterical now. You let me believe this was our house for 14 years. It is our home. It's just not technically. Doug spun back to me, his face a mask of rage. So what? You think because of some legal technicality, you can just kick us out? That's insane. No court would allow it. We've lived here for 14 years. That establishes residency rights. He actually had a point about tenant rights, even without a formal lease. But those protections didn't give him ownership, and they certainly didn't let him kick me off my property. I'm not talking about kicking you out, I said calmly. I'm pointing out that you're standing in the backyard of a house you don't own, telling the actual owner to leave. The irony is pretty thick, don't you think? This is insane. You're insane. Linda, your son is insane. Doug, please, let's just... No. I want him off my property.
Now.
He's not welcome here anymore. Sharp, resolute tone. I stood up from the table. Several guests were openly staring now. Fine, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I'll leave. But Doug, you might want to remember this conversation the next time you think about whose house this really is. Because if I'm not welcome in my own home, then maybe we need to have a serious discussion about who actually is welcome. I walked right out, got in my car, and drove home. My phone started blowing up before I even got there. Mom calling, texting, apologizing, my aunt calling to ask what happened. Brian texting to say, that was intense. I ignored all of it. For the rest of the evening, I just needed to think. The next morning, I made some decisions. First, I called my attorney. She's a real estate lawyer who'd helped me with previous investments. She confirmed everything. Doug was a tenant at will at best. He had no lease, paid no rent, no legal claim beyond living there with my mom, who did have residency rights. I could evict him with 30 days' notice. Standard procedure. What about Mom? I asked. She has lifetime residency rights per the trust. You can't evict her. And honestly, you probably wouldn't want to. But Doug? He's just her guest, and guests can be asked to leave. I spent a week mulling it over. Part of me wanted to cool off, let it blow over. But then, I started hearing what Doug was saying about me behind my back. According to Brian, Doug was telling everyone at the barbecue that I was mentally unstable and had threatened him, spinning the whole thing to make himself the victim. He told my aunt I'd tried to steal the house from his poor mother, and he was protecting her from my greed. My mom called me 3 days after the barbecue, crying. She apologized for Doug's behavior, said he was just stressed. Asked if I could please just let it go. She even said he'd promised to apologize if I came over for dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. A wry, almost sarcastic tone. Doug's idea of an apology was something like, I'm sorry you got upset about what I said. I was just expressing my opinions, and you took it too personally. But I accept your apology for disrespecting me, and we can move on. I literally laughed. I'm sorry, what? You accept my apology?
Yeah.
For correcting me in front of everyone. That was embarrassing. Doug, I said, my voice sharp. You told me to get off my own property. Our property. Our home? It's not your property. We established that. The deed is in my name. Yeah, on paper, maybe, but morally, ethically, this is the home I've lived in for 14 years. I've mowed this lawn, fixed the gutters, maintained everything. I've earned the right to call it mine. You've earned nothing. You don't pay rent. You don't pay taxes. You don't pay insurance. You contribute nothing financially to this property. I contribute my labor, my expertise. I'm the man of this house. My mom just sat there, wringing her hands, looking absolutely miserable. Doug, I said, my voice suddenly very calm. I'm going to ask you one time. Will you apologize sincerely for telling me to leave my own property and acknowledge that you don't own this house? He crossed his arms, defiant.
No.
Because I have nothing to apologize for. You are the one being disrespectful, and I don't care what some piece of paper says. This is my home, and as far as I'm concerned, you're just the landlord, and a pretty terrible one, demanding apologies from your own family. Okay, I said. Okay. And I left. A shift to determined, cold resolve. The next day, I called my attorney again. I told her to prepare the eviction paperwork. A 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Douglas Palmer, delivered properly and legally. My attorney asked if I was sure. I said yes. She asked about my mom. I explained that Mom wasn't being evicted, just Doug. Mom could stay as long as she wanted. Doug had to go. The paperwork was ready in 2 days. Now the question of delivery. I could have sent it by certified mail. I could have had a process server deliver it. But honestly, after everything Doug had said and done, I wanted to see his face. 2 Saturdays after the barbecue, I showed up at the house unannounced. Mom was surprised, but happy to see me. Doug was in his recliner, watching his usual programming. Jason, what a nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner? Actually, Mom, I brought dessert. I held up the apple pie I'd picked up from a bakery. Mom took it to the kitchen while I sat down in the living room. Doug barely acknowledged me, just grunted, and kept watching his show. How's it going, Doug? I asked, keeping my voice light. Fine. House treating you well? He finally looked at me, suspicious. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just making conversation. Hey, can you turn that off for a second? I have something for you. He muted the TV, looking annoyed. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. I handed it to him. What's this? Open it. I watched his face as he read. The confusion. The disbelief. Then, the pure, unadulterated rage. What is this? He snarled. That's a 30-day notice to vacate. You have until August 15th to find a new place to live. After that date, if you're still here, I'll begin formal eviction proceedings through the court. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. My mom came back from the kitchen. What's going on? Doug threw the papers at her. Your son is trying to kick me out. He's evicting me from my own home. Mom read the papers, her face going pale. Jason, you can't do this. This is our home. It's your home, Mom. You have the right to live here as long as you want. That right is protected in the trust. But Doug doesn't have the same protection. He's not on the deed. He's not in the trust. He doesn't pay rent. Legally, he's just a guest. And after what happened at the barbecue, he's a guest who's worn out his welcome. This is insane. Doug was on his feet now, towering over me. You can't just throw me out because you got your feelings hurt. I'm not throwing you out because my feelings got hurt. I'm removing a tenant who told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. You said I could get off your property, remember? Well, turns out it's not your property, so now you can get off mine. No court will enforce this. We'll fight it. I'll hire a lawyer. Go ahead. Any lawyer will tell you the same thing. You have no lease. You pay no rent. You have no legal claim to this property beyond your marriage to my mother. And spousal rights don't override the terms of my father's trust. You're month to month at best, and I'm giving you notice. Doug turned to my mom, desperate. Linda, tell him to stop this. Tell him he can't do this to your husband. My mom was crying now. Jason, please. I know he was wrong, but this is too much. Where will he go? That's his problem to figure out. He's got 30 days. That's more notice than most people get. He can find an apartment to move in with family, whatever he needs to do, but he's not staying here. Doug got right in my face. You ungrateful little punk. After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I spent taking care of your mother, keeping this house running, being a father figure to you, this is how you repay me. Father figure. I actually laughed out loud. Doug, you've never been anything close to a father figure. You've been a house guest who criticized everything I did, mooched off my father's house, and spent the last 15 years acting like you owned a property you never contributed to. My father built this. My father paid for it. My father made sure it would be protected. You just showed up after he died and moved in. I married your mother. That means something. It means you married my mother. It doesn't mean you own her house. It doesn't mean you get to tell the property owner to leave. And it doesn't mean I have to tolerate being disrespected in my own home by someone who lives there rent-free. Doug looked like he wanted to hit me. For a second, I almost wished he would. It would have made the eviction a lot simpler. Instead, he grabbed the eviction notice off the floor and tore it in half. There. Problem solved. I'm not going anywhere. I smiled. That's your copy. My attorney has the original filed with the county clerk. Tearing up the paper doesn't change anything. You've been served. I turned to my mom. Mom, I love you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you want. That will never change. But Doug has to go. This is my decision, and it's final. I left. Behind me, I could hear Doug shouting and my mom crying. It wasn't pleasant, but it was absolutely necessary. Transition to reflection and consequences. The next few weeks were chaos. Doug initially refused to believe the eviction was real. He consulted a lawyer friend who, apparently, told him exactly what my attorney had told me. He had no legal claim, and the eviction was valid. He tried calling me to negotiate, but his idea of negotiation was alternating between threats and guilt trips. "You're destroying your mother's life," he'd yell in one voicemail. "She'll never forgive you for this." Or, "I know people. You think you can just push me out? You have no idea who you're messing with." That one actually made me laugh out loud. What people? His buddies from the golf course? Please. He also started a full-blown campaign to turn family members against me. He called my aunt 3 times in 1 week, each time with a different story about how I was mentally unstable and taking advantage of my mother. He told my uncle I had forged documents to steal the house. He even called my grandmother, who's 86 and definitely doesn't need this kind of stress, to tell her I was robbing my own mother blind. My grandmother, bless her heart, called me right after and said, "Jason, I've known you since you were born, and I've known Doug for 14 years. I believe you. That man has always been too big for his britches." Have I mentioned how much I love my grandmother? The best part was when Doug tried to rally support from the neighbors. He went door to door, telling everyone I was this cruel, heartless son throwing his poor stepfather out on the streets. Most of the neighbors had known my father, watched me grow up, and weren't buying what Doug was selling. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down actually called me just to say she'd never liked Doug and was glad someone was finally putting him in his place. My mom tried multiple times to get me to reconsider. She showed up at my apartment crying. She called me at work. She sent long emails about how Doug was sorry, how he'd change, how I was breaking up their marriage. She even got my Aunt Karen, who I've always been close to call me on her behalf. Aunt Karen tried to explain that Doug was from a different generation and didn't mean things the way they sounded. I told Aunt Karen that Doug was from the same generation as my father, and my father never told me to get off my own property or laughed in my face when I pointed out basic facts. Being from a certain generation doesn't excuse being a terrible person. The most frustrating conversation was with my mom's best friend, Patricia, who called me one evening to help me see reason. Patricia explained that Doug was really struggling with feeling like he'd lost control of his life, and that maybe I could show some compassion. "Patricia," I said, my voice tight. "Doug has had 14 years of free housing. He's contributed nothing financially while acting like he owns the place. He told me, the actual owner, to leave my own property, and when I pointed out that I own the house, he laughed and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. What part of that deserves my compassion?" Patricia didn't have an answer. I felt bad for her, I really did. But I'd also seen how tired my mom looked at every family gathering, how she'd stopped expressing opinions, how she walked on eggshells around him. Part of me hoped this might actually be good for her in the long run. On day 25, Doug still hadn't moved out. He was calling my bluff, convinced I wouldn't actually go through with a court eviction. He was wrong. On day 31, I filed the formal eviction proceedings. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. That's when Doug finally started to take this seriously. He hired an actual attorney this time, not just a friend. His attorney sent mine a letter requesting a meeting to discuss a resolution. My attorney advised me to at least hear them out. We met at my attorney's office. Doug, his lawyer, me, and my lawyer. Doug walked in like he owned the place, same as always. Classic Doug. He was wearing his best golf polo and khakis, like he was showing up for a country club meeting instead of a legal negotiation about his impending homelessness. He didn't look at me, just sat down, crossed his arms, and stared at the wall. His attorney was a younger guy, maybe mid-30s, who looked like he'd drawn the short straw and gotten stuck with this case. He kept glancing at Doug like he was already regretting his life choices. Doug's attorney laid out their position. Doug had been a tenant for 14 years, had invested labor and resources into maintaining the property, and deserved compensation if he was going to be forced out. Compensation for what, exactly? My attorney asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. For the improvements Mr. Palmer has made to the property over the years, the landscaping, the maintenance, the upgrades to various systems. Does Mr. Palmer have receipts for these alleged improvements? He did not. Of course, he didn't. Furthermore, his attorney continued, we believe the eviction is being pursued in bad faith as retaliation for a personal disagreement. Mr. Palmer has done nothing to warrant removal from his home. I spoke up, unable to contain myself. His home? He doesn't own the home. He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't pay property taxes. He told me, the actual owner, to get off his property. When I pointed out that I owned the property, he laughed in my face and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. Well, I dared. Now he can deal with the consequences. Doug's attorney looked deeply uncomfortable. I got the sense he hadn't gotten the full story from his client. My attorney presented her case. The trust documents, the deed in my name, records showing 0 rent payments, 0 property tax contributions from Doug, nothing. She also presented the timeline of events, including signed witness statements from 3 people who were at the barbecue, confirming exactly what Doug had said. Doug's attorney asked for a recess. When they came back, his demeanor had completely changed. Mr. Palmer is willing to vacate the property within 60 days if Mr. Wallace will agree not to pursue him for any back rent or damages. Wait, Mr. Wallace? Everyone looked confused for a second before his attorney apologized, explaining he was working another eviction case and got his clients mixed up. Real professional. Anyway, I considered the offer. 60 days was longer than I wanted, but it would avoid a potentially messy court battle. 45 days, I countered. And he stays away from family events where I'm present for the next 2 years. Doug started to protest, but his attorney put a hand on his arm. We can agree to 45 days. The family event restriction is unusual, but if it avoids further conflict, Mr. Palmer will comply. We signed the agreement that afternoon. Doug was out of the house 43 days later. He moved into an apartment across town, which I'm told is significantly smaller and significantly less nice than the house he'd been living in, rent-free, for 14 years. My mom stayed in the house. I told her she could live there as long as she wanted, no strings attached. She cried and thanked me and said she was sorry for everything. A warm, satisfied tone. And here's the update everyone's been waiting for. It's been 6 months since Doug moved out. My mom? She's doing better than I ever expected. The first few weeks were rough, but around week 3, I stopped by the house and found her rearranging furniture. She'd moved Doug's recliner to the garage and replaced it with a beautiful reading chair from an estate sale. The TV was off. Music was playing. I hadn't heard music in that house since my father was alive. Over the following weeks, she started reconnecting with friends she'd lost touch with. Her college roommate visited. Her sister flew in from Colorado. The women from her old book club reached out and invited her back. She joined art classes at the community center, something Doug had always called a waste of money. She set up a little studio in the spare bedroom. Her first painting was terrible, honestly, but she was so proud of it that I framed it and hung it in my apartment. She's thriving. A mischievous, slightly triumphant tone. Doug, meanwhile, crashed and burned. From what I hear through the family grapevine, his new apartment flooded 3 weeks after he moved in, burst pipe in the unit above him, destroyed most of his furniture and electronics. Insurance covered some of it, but he cheaped out on renter's insurance, so he ate most of the loss. had to sleep on an air mattress for 2 weeks. Then he got rear-ended at a stoplight. His truck was in the shop for 6 weeks. The other driver's insurance covered it, but Doug had to take Ubers everywhere because he'd let his AAA membership lapse. He spent over $800 on rides in those 6 weeks alone. His apartment complex also hit him with a fine for violating the noise ordinance. Apparently, he'd been watching his cable news programs at maximum volume late at night, and the neighbors complained. The property manager sent him a warning. He ignored it. They fined him $300. He tried to fight it and lost. My mom filed for divorce about 2 months after he moved out. Doug tried to claim half of everything, including the house. His attorney had to explain again that he had no claim to a property held in trust that predated the marriage. The judge actually laughed during one of the hearings when Doug's lawyer tried to argue he'd invested sweat equity into a home he'd lived in rent-free. The divorce finalized last month. Doug walked away with his personal belongings, his truck, and about $12,000 from their joint savings account. That was it. 14 years of marriage, and he got less than 1 year of rent would have cost him. The best part? Remember his golf buddies he was always bragging about? Turns out they were more interested in using his backyard for summer cookouts than in his actual friendship. Once he moved to the apartment with no yard and no grill, the invitations stopped coming. I heard from my cousin that Doug tried to organize a golf outing last month, and only 2 people showed up. Last month, Doug made one final play. He showed up at my mom's house unannounced, flowers in hand, talking about reconciliation and starting fresh. My mom called me while he was still on the porch. I drove over. Doug was sitting on the front steps, looking pathetic, when I pulled up. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said. "This is between me and Linda."
No.
"This is you trespassing on my property again. You want me to call the cops, or are you going to leave?" He left the flowers on the porch and drove away. My mom threw them in the trash. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn notification. Doug had viewed my profile. Then a friend request on Facebook. Then a text from an unknown number asking if we could grab coffee and clear the air. I blocked everything. My mom is truly thriving now. She joined a hiking group, started volunteering at an animal shelter, and last week she told me she went on a coffee date with a guy from her art class. Said it was nice to talk to someone who actually listened when she spoke. The house looks different these days. Mom repainted the living room, replaced the old curtains Doug had picked out, put up some of her own paintings. It feels like a home again, instead of a bunker. She's hosting Thanksgiving this year, the first time in over a decade. She already sent out invitations to family members Doug had driven away over the years. My aunt is coming. My cousin Brian and his wife. Even my grandmother, who's 86 and doesn't travel much anymore, said she wouldn't miss it. Doug wasn't invited, obviously. Last I heard, he's trying to sell his truck to cover some credit card debt he racked up furnishing his apartment. The same truck he used to park in my father's driveway, like he owned the place. Funny how things work out. So, that's my story. Doug told me to get off his property. I reminded him it was my property. He laughed and said I wouldn't dare. 6 months later, he's living in a flood-damaged apartment, driving a truck he can't afford, divorced, and trying to sell his prized possession to pay off debt. I dared. A final, direct address. Honestly, I'm still processing all of this. It was incredibly hard, especially seeing my mom cry. But I don't regret it for a second. Have any of you ever had to draw such a hard line with a family member who just wouldn't respect boundaries? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.